Hey, indie filmmakers, I'm Griffin Hammond.
I'm Nick Bodmer, and on this week's episode, Panasonic has updated the GH5 firmware. We're taking a look at its powerful new features.
Plus, your questions about color correcting, why frame rates come in such weird numbers, and filming flood rescue at night without lights.
Ooh, exciting.
Yeah, we got some exciting stuff on the show today.
That's quite the tease, Griffin. I am teased up.
But the big thing I want to talk about today is the new firmware update that came out for my camera, the Panasonic GH5.
La-ti-da, you've got the fancy camera, I know.
I wonder, we should even look to see if they've come out with updates for your camera, the G85.
Panasonic G85 firmware update. Let's find out.
Yeah, I mean, this is what's crazy to me, is they come out with firmware updates for everything these days. Not just Panasonic, but like, I mean, on the Panasonic cameras, the lenses themselves can have firmware updates, so you should always check to see if you're using the latest lens firmware, as well as body firmware. But we even noticed with our DJI Sparks all the things that have firmware updates.
Yeah, it was like the charger and the battery and the drone itself and the controller all have their own firmware.
Yeah.
That all have to match.
So all of this stuff, yeah, can add new features. I think this is the second firmware update that they've released for the GH5. They had the version 1.1 back in April, and that added a few things. And then
Probably
now,
more bug fixes than anything, right?
Yeah, mostly bug fixes. There's a couple bug fixes in this new version 2.0, which we'll get to. But for the most part, people are pretty excited about, there's a new bit rate.
What is the bit rate?
You can now shoot 400 megabits per second with the camera.
That is a hefty frame rate, or a bit rate,
right.
I should say.
Yeah, same frame rates. I guess this is for 4K 30p shooting. You can do 10-bit color, 422, which is also another way to talk about color. This is an all-eye compression codec and 400 megabits per second.
So it looks great and has tons of details, is what you're telling me.
Well, yeah, for people that need ultra-high bitrate and all-eye and all those things, that's great. Although again, like I've said with other things on this camera, I am not sure I can notice the difference between something that's shot at 150 megabits per second or 400 megabits, or something that's 10-bit versus 8-bit color. I know I can't see the difference between that.
I'm sure there are people out there who will make great use of this feature, though.
Yeah, I
can't imagine. You must have to have like a crazy fast SD card in order to record that, right? I mean, that's a ton of data.
Well, yeah, let's see. What would mine... Let's look at the ones I even have in my camera right now. I have a SanDisk Extreme Plus card that I use for normal 4K 60p stuff. I think I'm shooting at 150 megabits per second most of the time. And this is an 80 megabyte per second card, which I think it means it can read that fast. I think in reality it probably writes at around 40 megabytes per second. So what is that? It's 320 megabits per second?
Yeah,
because there's
times
8
right?
bits in a byte. So presumably this card I have, the SanDisk Extreme Plus, would probably fall just short of being able to record 400 megabits per second.
Close, but no cigar, Griffin.
But it's good to know that the cards that I have and have had for years are close. So presumably I could just
They're in
go
the
out,
ballpark,
yeah,
at least.
You'd think I could just go out on the market and find one. But there is some confusion because Panasonic says you need a V60 card. Do you know what V60 is? I
don't.
I guess, I don't know, it's some new way of talking about the ratings for these cards. But V60, I mean, that must be guaranteed writing 60 megabytes per second or something, right?
Oh, that makes sense.
I bet that's what it is.
Because 400 megabits per second is like 50 megabytes a second. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, so if it can definitely write 60 megabytes per second, it should be able to handle 400 megabits per second. But
exactly.
Then the confusion comes in. Panasonic says you need at least a V60 card, but the one that we can guarantee works is a V90 card that we made.
Of course.
And maybe you do want some buffer there, some range there. I don't know.
Yeah, you probably don't want to cut it too close and have a write failure as you're recording this stuff.
The only problem is Panasonic is not necessarily in the market of selling SD cards. So their V90 SD card, I think it might be 128 gigabytes, is like $500.
Oh, of course.
So
reasonable.
It's not the best. It's not the best price choice necessarily, but it is a card that Panasonic can guarantee works. I think it was nice that they have a card available, so that if you feel like you absolutely have to do this 400 megabit recording, they can at least say there's something on the market for you.
Yeah, I'm looking real quick just at Amazon, and like the no-name brand A-Data has 128 gig V90 card for 160. So
okay.
Still pretty pricey, even for like kind of the knockoff brands.
And I think
maybe they're not a knockoff brand, but
it's probably important to point out that the technology hasn't quite caught up with the product, so I'm sure more SD cards will come on the market. But there was, I do see this question pop up a lot in some of the forums, is that people have, I think even someone was saying they were holding off on upgrading their camera to the new firmware because they didn't want to have to shoot, they didn't want to buy new SD cards.
Well, I'm assuming this is just a new mode option, right? It's not like it's forcing you to use this.
Right, that's what the confusion is.
You still have all the old options, right?
Yeah, you can still do everything the camera used to be able to do. It's not forcing you to shoot 400 megabits per second. It's just there if you want it.
But maybe they're like us, and if that mode is there, they'll really want to turn it on and not be able to help themselves.
Well, you know, there's always comments like this. I saw one comment, though, was like, if you're not shooting 400 megabits per second, then you're not a real filmmaker.
Of course.
It's like, it just came out last week. Like, were there not real filmmakers before last week?
There were not, but thankfully we finally will have some real filmmakers.
Right. I mean, I know that I don't need 400 megabits recording. I won't start using it. It's not for me.
So can you think of a type of project, or what might make you think, okay, maybe this is something I want to think about?
Well, for the people that are already interested in 422 10-bit color, the reason you would be shooting that anyway is because you expect to be really pushing the color data. You're going to have a colorist work on this film, and maybe it's going to change significantly from the way you shot it into some other look. And having the additional the bit rate, and also having the all-eye codec, where what does that mean?
All intra frames,
right?
Meaning, basically, there's no. Every frame is described in its completion. It's not referencing previous frames,
right? Which I think mostly affects playback speed, or asking how much it's asking your computer to do to decode.
Right.
But all of this can help with the quality of the image for when you're pushing it pretty far. I know that, like I've said, I know that I can't see the difference straight out of the camera between these bit rates and this amount of color bit rate and all of that. So for the kind of stuff I do where it's mostly documentary stuff and I'm very happy with what I'm getting out of the camera and I know I don't need to push it a ton, that's not really a feature that I need.
All right, so talk me through some of the other features. What else is in there that you might be more excited about?
So the thing I'm actually really excited about, and I already tried out, is what's called it's called the high resolution anamorphic mode.
Ooh.
So the camera already could shoot anamorphic, meaning it's shooting a 4:3 image. It's using the full shape of the sensor. And it's anamorphic in that you would put an anamorphic adapter or an anamorphic lens on your camera and shoot a wider shot, and it squeezes it onto this smaller,
larger frame.
Yeah, onto this 4:3 sensor. The idea then is you bring it into editing and you re-stretch it back out, and you have this widescreen image that you've shot. But it has, we've talked about anamorphic.
It has more
before.
pixels. Yeah, it has more pixels than it would have if you had just shot it with a regular lens that only used the widescreen portion of the sensor.
Right. It's better than cropping the image afterward. I mean, a lot of people do like to shoot in 16:9 and then just throw out a bunch of pixels to give it that CinemaScope form factor, that really skinny or really short aspect ratio. But this is like the more cinematic way of getting it.
Yeah, in more detail.
So you already could do that form factor. They've just increased the number of pixels that you can do. Now you can do 4,992 pixels across, which is pretty much 5K resolution horizontally.
Mm-hmm.
Although you'll notice in all the information about this new firmware update, Panasonic calls it 6K.
Why not call it 8K? 10K?
Well,
Keep up in that number.
I was a little bit confused when I first saw 6K, because they're referring to it as 6K, but it's clearly about 5,000 pixels wide. But the reason
isn't 4K only like 2,000 pixels wide?
No, 4K, you're confused. 4K is about 4,000 pixels wide. 4K is like UHD.
I'm thinking of its height.
Yeah, you're thinking of the height. 4K height is 2160.
There we go.
And the horizontal resolution is like 3840 when it's ultra high definition. When it's cinema 4K, it's like 4096. But the reason Panasonic is using the 6K name is because they're comparing it to their old 4K photo mode. And because you're shooting 4:3, you're actually shooting a taller image than what would normally be like a 5K.
There's a whole extra K is what they're saying.
Yeah, I mean, they've compared the megapixels. Like, the megapixels in this 4:3 shape are about 19 megapixels. And that's pretty close to what a 16:9 6K video would be. So it's just like a different shape. I guess they just kind of want to say, like, there's a lot of pixels there. Don't call it 5K because there's more pixels than that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
But the reason I like this is because I like the idea that you could shoot an interview this way, and you're getting about 900 extra pixels over 4K in the horizontal direction. And in the vertical direction, you're getting like 73% more pixels. Like, you're almost doubling the height of what you're normally getting in 4K. So you have some options to recrop.
So you can shoot in this mode without an anamorphic lens, right? And just have a 4:3 frame?
Yes. In fact, that's how I used it last week. I was speaking to a group of journalists from Kazakhstan. They were visiting the U.S. And I thought I should get some video of this. It'd be nice to have some video of myself talking. So I threw the camera in the back of the room, and I thought, I don't really know where I'm going to move. This is a perfect time to use anamorphic, and later I can decide how I want to crop this thing.
Cool. Do you have any anamorphic lenses? Have you ever played with it?
I don't. I'd be very interested to.
Yeah, that could be fun if you could get your hands on a lens, shoot a little test project, and kind of talk us through the workflow of then how you go about stretching it back out and what kind of issues you run into.
Yeah.
I think that would be neat.
I'm a little bit nervous about the workflow because if I used like a 2x anamorphic adapter, put a special 2x lens on my camera, when I stretched it back out in post, I would end up with, if I wanted to be true to the vertical resolution, I would end up with a timeline that is almost 10,000 pixels wide and almost 4,000 pixels tall.
Time for a new computer.
Yeah, I don't think my computer could handle it. In fact, actually,
when that iMac Pro comes out, you'll have to get one.
I would. I'd have to spend $5,000 on a computer.
Starting price.
Right. Well, I'll spend $10,000.
There you go. This is your living. You gotta spend money to make money.
Although even this mode, the high resolution anamorphic mode, I shot the footage. It's a MP4 file on the camera. The camera can play it back just fine. I throw it on the computer and it doesn't work at all the first time
It's like, what is this?
Yeah, I realized they're actually using H.265 encoding for this.
Oh, HEVC.
Yeah. High efficiency video coding. And I don't think out of the box most of my software is ready to handle that.
Now, have you upgraded to High Sierra yet on your Mac?
I don't know if I have.
That's the new version of the Mac operating system that just came out like a week or two ago? 2 weeks ago, maybe?
I'm on El Capitan.
Are you kidding?
I'm on version 10.11. Am I really behind?
You are way behind, yeah. No, after El Capitan was Sierra, that was a whole year, and now High Sierra, a year later, has come out, so you're 2 years behind.
Oh, wow.
And in High Sierra, Apple has added support for HEVC.
Okay.
Because the new iPhones all shoot in that format for video and photo, so they're significantly smaller file sizes for the same quality video.
Yeah.
But you need High Sierra to support that. So go to your app store on your Mac, and High Sierra's free. You just click download, and it'll update.
That'll be interesting to see if
do you have a Fusion drive, or do you have all SSD in your Mac?
I have a Fusion drive.
Okay, well then you will not get upgraded to Apple's new file system. They are migrating off their old file system, HFS Plus, which is like 15, 20 years old, to the APFS, the Apple file system. But they are only automatically moving you to that if you are in an all SSD situation.
I should add as a side note that I know that having a Fusion drive was not what you recommended. That
is correct.
And had I had enough time, I just needed the computer very quickly, and that's what they had available back when I got it.
And does that cause you any issues? Or you're not editing off that drive anyway, are you?
No, I'm editing off the drive.
Oh, and it works okay even with 4K?
Yeah, it works fine. But I do always have it in the back of my head that you told me that I should have gotten an SSD.
You should have, but you know, I don't know anything about storage, so why would you even ask me?
Well, I will say that even though I haven't upgraded my operating system, and maybe it will be interesting to see if that fixes the problem. I did ask my friends at Panasonic if they have any workflow tips for dealing with H.265, and they recommended some software called Edit Ready, which I had never heard of, but it's by the same people that used to make Clip Wrap.
Oh, Clip Wrap. I forgot all about that.
Yeah, we used to use that like back with our first Panasonic camera, the GH1. It was a similar situation. They come out with a new camera. It does some exciting new things. The software and computers are not set up yet to perfectly handle it. So I think we had to run some of our footage through Clip Wrap to just prepare it.
Yeah, because it was AVC HD, right?
Well,
and
back
that,
then,
like, weird format always screwed with Final Cut.
Yeah, and actually back then, I don't even think we had to transcode anything. It wasn't that the format, we weren't transcoding to ProRes. We just had to rewrap the clip with like a different...
Exactly. So it went quick, but it was something you had to do first.
It was essentially just changing the file names and file extensions.
But do you remember, so that was when I got into the habit of just copying the entire SD card, including the folder structure, because if you just went and grabbed the video files, it got to be a mess trying to get it into a format. Yeah, it needed that whole directory structure. It's very strange.
And eventually, I think with the GH2, or maybe even with some firmware updates, Panasonic made it simpler to shoot on those cameras. And right now, because my computer does not know what to do with an H.265 file, I've just been... This first test I did, I transcoded it into ProRes, which I can edit. But they're huge files. You can imagine they're 18 megapixels, an 18 megapixel image, 30 times a second in ProRes. It's gigantic.
Ginormous.
So,
too bad you don't have an SSD to handle that.
Yeah, I may need it for that.
All right, what else we got? What else is new?
Well, related to Anamorphic, they added two features that I think people will be pretty excited about, especially if you're shooting in Anamorphic. They added Anamorphic D Squeeze, so no longer do you have to get used to looking at your skinny video file on the screen. It will actually stretch it out for you to show you what it will look like when you're editing it.
Oh, that's handy.
I mean, people used to use monitors for that. They'd shoot squeezed on the camera, and then the monitor could show it de-squeezed, but now you could do it in the camera.
Good.
And then this is something that people have asked for so much, and I let Panasonic know as much as I could. Hey, this is a request we keep getting. Maybe you guys can add something to the camera, and I'm happy to say that they did. They're calling it Video Guideline, and it's to give you crop marks for those people that don't have anamorphic lenses but do want to crop their video later and make it kind of look like CinemaScope. Yeah. People have always been asking for, hey, can I just get some guidelines on the screen that are 2.35 to 1? That's like CinemaScope. There's also... And
you can just turn that on in the settings, I take it?
Yeah, and so now there's two little lines that show up on the screen.
Nice.
Just so you have an idea of how you're framing your video, knowing that you're going to crop it later. There's also 2.39 to 1, and there's also a 1 to 1. I guess, I don't know if you're shooting for Instagram, they have a square guide.
Well, that's handy.
And then I think there's also a 16:9 guide, which I suppose could come in handy when you're shooting anamorphic or some other mode. Actually, I turned that on when I was shooting 4:3 anamorphic. I thought I should at least show myself what 16:9 looks like.
Oh, so you get an idea of how you could crop it later.
Right.
Makes sense.
The other thing that people are really excited about, but I'm not sure what to do with it or if I would even do anything with it, is this thing called hybrid log gamma. Do you know what this is?
Yeah, that's interesting. So hybrid log gamma, or HLG, is a kind of new and up-and-coming HDR format, or high dynamic range format. So you might be familiar. I don't know if you've gone and bought a TV anytime soon, knowing you probably not.
I haven't, but yeah, I know that they all have that now.
So the two competing standards right now are, oh gosh, HDR10 something 10. I think I might be getting that kind of wrong. Or a Dolby Vision. Those are kind of the two that we see out in the world right now.
Different standards, but they're both HDR.
Different standards, but both HDR, different ways of showing high dynamic range video. And this hybrid log gamma is another method of showing HDR video, but the advantage is you can combine the SDR and HDR into a single video stream, and it just has a way of talking about the color and light, so that whatever kind of display you have can display it properly without needing like a whole separate HDR stream or HDR video. It's all in one.
So not only are you shooting high dynamic range that you can then, if you're smart enough to figure out how to edit it and prep it, you can do all that, but also just straight out of the camera, hybrid log gamma will support being played on a standard dynamic range television or a high dynamic range television.
That's correct.
Cool.
So kind of neat. And I think this is the first HDR format available on the Panasonic cameras, right?
I don't know about their cinema cameras maybe, but I think as far as the Lumix line goes, I think this is the first time these mirrorless cameras have been able to do it.
That's awesome.
So it's still a little above my head, but I know that many people are excited about it.
Yeah, I just don't know if the sensor itself has enough dynamic range for it to make a huge deal. I'd be interested to find out what the difference really is.
Yeah.
Because I'm not sure how much it grows the dynamic range available to a shot, I guess.
Right.
I don't really understand how that part works, so... If anyone out there has any ideas and would like to share it, give us a comment.
Yeah. So they've also improved.
What else?
They've also improved the autofocus. Although I haven't tested out autofocus significantly with the new firmware, so I don't know how much of an improvement. But I know that some people.
And that was a criticism of it originally, right? Is people were not real happy with the autofocus.
Right. Some people didn't like it, and I was always fine with it, but some people didn't like it. So I guess they made some changes there.
Okay.
They also added, this is another thing that I don't really need, although it's kind of cool. They've come out with some PC software. I assume it's Mac software too. Just some Tether software for the camera. So for those people that do like studio photography and they want to be able to take photos, and I think you can like get the photos live through the software and control the camera through the software. I don't know if it has any video implications, but for those photographers who need that kind of thing, they've added that. I think that's one reason there's a USB-C port on the GH5 is so that you can plug it into a computer and tether.
Handy.
Also,
I used the G85 for some photos on a recent trip, and I was really happy with how they turned out.
Yeah.
Shooting in RAW.
Yeah.
So I had some photo fun with Panasonic recently.
I've been shooting a lot in RAW recently too, and realizing how powerful it is. And now I feel like a photographer.
You are a photographer, Griffin.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah, now I probably could call myself that. And now that I get the Lumix Tether software, I'll really be a photographer.
Infrared only photographer, though.
Yeah.
Is the only catch. You can't handle all the colors.
So here's another criticism that the GH5 had that they fixed, kind of. Some people didn't like the placement of the display button.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's on the same spot on the G85. It's like it's on the back, kind of where your thumb might go, depending on how you hold the camera.
For me, it's on the left side, like to the left of the LCD and above.
Oh, okay. This is way over on the right side.
I can't see it right now.
And it's kind of flat. It's hard to feel. I mean, I actually sometimes have trouble finding it. But a lot of people complain that they hit it by accident, which doesn't happen to me. I guess I don't put my hand there, but I can see why that would happen. So I've seen people doing crazy things like gluing a metal washer over it.
Oh, jeez.
So that you really have to extreme. Reach in, yeah.
Well, I was thinking you might do a Griffin Hammond special and get the hacksaw out and just take that button right out.
Where's
that lens you gave me?
You
let me borrow that lens, and it's all hacked to hell. It's funny.
Now that I'm using the new 8 to 18 millimeter as my wide angle lens, I sent the 7 to 14 over to Nick so he could play around with it. But it's that one that I chopped up. So yeah, now you can lock the display button if you're someone who is annoyed by that. I know you can also they added some more customizable function buttons as well. I think they increased the number of things that you can customize.
Sweet.
And then finally, they've made a couple bug fixes. There was some weird problem that I remember people told me about where it was something, I can't even remember exactly how to replicate it, but if you went into the white balance settings and tried to set Kelvin, which is actually how I set white balance a lot, sometimes the way you set Kelvin, you'd come back out and the image stabilization would stop working.
I think I did hear about that. Yeah, that's a bug. I'd say that qualifies as a bug.
I think it happened to me maybe once, and I knew it immediately because luckily I could tell the difference when the image stabilization is going or not. So when I saw it wasn't going and I just changed white balance, I thought, oh, I just screwed it up. So I think I just turned it off and turned it back on, and then it worked. But that was kind of a silly problem, so I'm glad they fixed it.
Yep.
And then the other thing is, I'd have to try this out myself, but they say that they've improved the image quality when using certain modes that kind of mess with the range of the camera. When you shoot in extended low ISO, they've apparently improved the image quality, which I know people had pointed out to me that if you went below 200 ISO, you would lose some image quality, and I saw it myself. So maybe I don't need to be afraid to shoot below 200 anymore.
Well, it sounds all in all like a pretty big update.
Yeah, I guess that's why it's a 2.0, not a 1.3. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, they're only on 1.1. And hopefully my G85 will get an update with some extra features. That would be cool.
Yeah. We'll put a link in the show notes at Hey.film to the firmware update page. And actually, I can link to all the Lumix products. So if you want to check all your lenses and your bodies and see if they have updated firmware, you can. Now,
is updating the firmware difficult? Do we need a Griffin Hammond tutorial video?
I've thought about it. I think it's more difficult navigating the website than it is to... It's actually not that hard. It just takes a few steps of navigating the website and kind of figuring out, okay, which thing am I updating the firmware for? But once you download
drop
the
it
firmware,
on an SD card?
Yeah, it's pretty easy. You download it as a zip file, you unzip it, there's a .bin file, that's the firmware. You just put it in the root directory of the SD card, so it's like next to your DCIM folders, all those. And you just put it in the camera, turn on the camera, push the play button, like you're going to go watch some videos you shot, and as soon as you go in there, it should start installing.
Sweet.
Yeah, so it's not hard.
Make sure you've got a nice fully charged battery.
Yeah, actually, it won't let you install unless you have a fully charged battery.
Oh, see?
Yeah. So yeah, it's pretty easy.
You're welcome, Panasonic, for that little tip.
Well, in just a moment, we are answering your questions about color correcting, why frame rates come in such weird numbers, and filming flood rescue at night, but without lights.
Hey Filmmakers is brought to you by Tongle. Tongle is a creative network where anyone, anywhere, has the opportunity to make content for brands and get paid for their work.
So here's how a typical project works. Brands post a creative ask, and then people on Tongle, in the Tongle community, submit ideas around that ask, and the brand chooses the one that they like the best. Next, filmmakers pitch an idea to execute on that, and the brand decides who gets the project, who actually gets to film it. So great videos get made, and the chosen idea creators and the pitch winners get paid.
See what projects are available right now at tongle.com/projects. That's TONGAL.com/projects. Thanks, Tongle. So, Griffin, we've got a Twitter question from Dr. Sam Tam. He says, Griffin, I'm going to be shooting some solo interviews at a film festival on Saturday, and he was wondering if you have any advice.
So my short Twitter response to him was just that he should bring a tripod, and I was hoping that he had like a flip-out LCD, because my concern is I want him to be able to focus on the person he's interviewing, you know, give them positive feedback and not shake the camera. So if he can just set up the camera next to him on the tripod, flip out the LCD and look at it, he can kind of check it every once in a while and make sure that the shot is still good, the person's not stepping out of frame. But then he can really focus on getting the microphone in the shot, or not in the shot, but close to the person, out of frame, get some good audio.
Beautiful.
I guess I don't always love having to carry around a tripod, but I think for this, for interviews, it's nice.
Another Twitter question from Sam Lance. Griffin, I would love to hear what steps you take when color correcting and grading your footage and how you keep colors consistent.
Well, keeping colors consistent starts in the camera. I think it helps to not shoot in auto white balance. Auto white balance can be nice Nick thinks that I'm making
I feel like
fun
you're
of him.
ripping at me. You're making fun of me right now. Before we started,
I mean,
was like, "Oh, my white balance doesn't look good." He's like, "Oh, I think you were in auto white balance last week." I was like, "I've been in auto white balance for 36 episodes, so."
I mean, I will
it
say
usually works pretty good.
I will say I am impressed that the auto white balance on your camera doesn't change too quickly. It kind of, I think it weights and averages over time. So I seem to only notice the changes when I skim through a video file from you very quickly. Like if I see your whole hour-long video in 3 seconds, I can notice some shifts in color.
Gotcha.
But I never noticed it
Well, I am
real
in
time.
manual white balance now. In fact, the presets weren't working because I've got some natural light coming through a window and I've got an incandescent over here. So per Griffin's instructions, I manually set the Kelvin. And it looks not great right now, actually. The colors are not good. It's just bad lighting. I don't know what to tell you.
Well, hopefully I've already fixed it while people are watching this. We'll see.
Right. Yeah. So what steps will you take to fix my bad color correcting?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I do, like you said, I do like to dial in the Kelvin. I like that even if I get it a little bit wrong, I'd almost prefer to have it a little bit wrong on several shots, but they're all consistent, than have different color for every shot, because now I'm going to have to go in the edit and change each one separately. But if I can get it at least close, I mean, usually I try to get it exactly right in the camera and not have to do any color correction. But if they're a little bit off, but they all look the same, I can go in and, first of all, you know, maybe I need to change just the yellow a little bit, because anything that's not white balanced correctly is probably going to be too blue or too yellow. Just kind of one color area that's wrong. So a lot of times I'll pull up the color corrector in Final Cut and I'll just adjust the midtones, because I find that if I adjust the highlights or the shadows, it becomes really obvious what you're doing.
Yeah.
Because like black, like the blackest shadow in your shot will start to turn blue or yellow when you push it in that direction. And generally black is just black and white is just white. And it's the middle stuff where we see a lot of the color. So I usually just push the midtones. And if I just push it up into the yellow or down into the blue just a little bit, that usually fixes the problem.
Okay.
It's only
Now,
the shots that
let
are
me ask
really
this.
wrong. It's only when I really screw up white balance do I have to like move the global color. So usually it's just midtones.
Like when you're editing photos, a lot of programs have the ability to take like a little dropper and basically click on something white and then
Yeah.
it just white balances that. Why does Final Cut not have something like that?
Final Cut does have an auto correct, which pretty much does that, but it also fixes some other things.
But it
yeah,
doesn't
you're right.
always work.
Yeah, that would be nice. And I actually wouldn't be surprised if someone has built a plugin that does something like that.
Yeah, that would make my life easier. So that's what I
Yeah,
want.
that would be an easier way to do it. I've just gotten used to, I always kind of know what kinds of problems I might run into, and then they're pretty repeatable. The only other thing I ever do to color correct is a lot of times recently I've been shooting a lot outside and just ending up with footage that's just a little tiny bit too bright. So a lot of times I'll just drop the mid-tone luminance a little bit, just bring the whole shot just a tiny bit darker. And the consequence of that, not only does it bring me into a range that I like light-wise, anytime you lower the midtones, it also makes the colors richer.
Yep.
It seems like it increases the saturation. So if I need to counteract that, if I don't want the colors to be richer, I'll just flip into saturation and I can or down the mid-tone color saturation a little bit.
Do you ever use the match color tool in Final Cut to match one frame to another?
I've played with it a little bit. You select the frame that you like the color of and you tell it you want it to make your other shot look like that. And maybe 30% of the time for me, that does a great job. But most of the time, it's not exactly what I wanted.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with your hit right there. When it does work, though, it's kind of magical. It's like, oh, that was easy.
Yeah.
So I usually try it when if I'm doing a wedding and like one shot is just dramatically different than the other. Sometimes it fixes it like that.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're like, oh, well, nope, going to have to do this manually.
I usually go to it when I can't figure it out. When I've screwed it up entirely, I'm trying to make something match and just is not working. That I go to that as a last resort.
All right, we got a YouTube comment from Maciej Buchkowski. How'd I do on that one?
I think Maciej Buchkovsky, but good job.
Thank you. I thought it was pretty good. In Final Cut Pro 10, there are multiple frame rate options. What I don't understand is why some speeds are just a fraction of a part, like 30 and 29.97, 60 and 59.94, etc. They Googled it, found some vague references about technical difficulties with sound sync decades ago. What rate should I use if I want to post my video to YouTube?
Honestly, for YouTube, in fact, if you look up the YouTube tech specs, it will accept any of those. But I do everything in 29.97 for television or for YouTube.
I do as well, though, again, I also do not fully understand the technical reasons why the different options exist.
I don't fully understand it, but I kind of understand it. And he's right. It does have to do with sound synchronization problems. It actually has to do with the introduction of color to television. Really, we have to go back even a little bit further and start with just why we even have these frame rates. They chose 30 in the US because it matches our 60 hertz electrical system.
Yep.
So we've noticed this. If you shoot in another country, you often get some shutter problems where you have flickering lights. But if you're shooting in the US at 30 frames per second, or with a shutter speed of 1/60th of a second, with lights that refresh 60 times a second, you don't have that problem. And likewise, you shoot 25 when you're in the UK and many other countries in the PAL system. So that's where they came up with their 25 frame per second system. And the same reason we use 60 and they use 50. But I guess when they added color, now they had to add some more data to the equation. When they did that, it was causing some phasing issues with the audio. They essentially just did some math and figured, we're going to have to remove, or we have to do slightly less frame capture per second, just barely. And that can eliminate this problem that we're having, sending both the color signal and the sound signal at the same time. So what I figured out that actually simplifies this a little bit to help you come up with these numbers is all they did is they just divided the frame rate by 1.001. That was the ratio they figured they needed to do to correct the problem. So that's how they landed on 29.97. And it's also how you get to 59.94. Or if you divide 24 frames per second, you get 23.976. That's where all these numbers come from, is that ratio.
Fascinating stuff. Fascinating history.
This confused me for a long time because I thought, does that mean they're shooting, like, there's a partial frame? Or a frame gets lost or something? But the more I think about it, I realize nothing gets lost. I'm sure the difference between 30 frames per second exactly versus 29.97 frames per second is not a noticeable difference. Like if you sped up 29.97 up to 30, you're not going to see a difference. So it just means that over time less frames are played or more frames are played depending on which direction, but you won't really see the difference. I guess this does become a problem with drift though. If you're trying to mix footage that was shot in two different ways. Sure. In fact, we had this problem. You were shooting for a while the podcast at 30 frames per second exactly on an iPhone.
With my iPhone, yeah.
And my camera was shooting 29.97 exactly, which means that over, maybe every minute we lose a frame or two.
And it just, by the end, it was way off.
Yeah. So I would just say it doesn't really matter what you shoot too much. Just make sure that what you shoot matches what you export. And YouTube can handle either one, but don't mix footage, or at least if you're going to, I guess in some cases all you'd have to do is do that automatic speed that we talked about last week.
Yeah, just reconform it.
Yeah. Here's a YouTube comment that we got from our friend James, who, if you may know James from when I used to do the Indie Mogul live show. We had James from the UK on all the time. He goes by Golden Pigeon on YouTube, and he was wondering about the 3-to-1 rule that we were talking about last week. We learned that if you have two microphones together in the same recording space, you should have, if one of them is 1 foot away from your sound source, you should have the next one at least 3 feet away, just to avoid that weird echo that we had.
Yep.
He had an idea. He thought, well, could you also just apply this to gain? if you just turn down a mic so it's only, one mic is 3 times louder than the other one, would that also fix the problem?
Great question. I don't know. I guess so.
I don't think so.
Okay, tell me what your logic is. You're probably right. I only gave it about 7 seconds of thought.
Well, you'd probably notice it less. I mean, I'm sure it would help you not notice it. But I would think that whatever your gain is, you're still going to have the same signal to noise ratio. Like if you're going to have to turn it back up anyway in the edit, like you haven't fixed anything. But also, I think the problem is the distance and the echo. Like maybe you'll turn it down and we won't hear it as much, but it's still going to be the exact same echo, right?
Yeah, it would have to be, right?
Yeah. So I can't imagine that fixes the problem.
And there's the square cube law, too, which has to do with how sound waves fall off over distance, which I think is probably going to come into play as well.
And as we discovered last week, I mean, yeah, I can barely wrap my brain around it, but I think the best answer we came up with last week was we shouldn't put 2 mics like that close to each other. We should have used 1.
Exactly.
So our next question is one for you, Nick. This is a Twitter question that we got from Patrick Gavin. He's a documentary filmmaker, and he sent us an email. Actually, he sent you an email, and I guess you didn't respond to it. He noticed on the podcast last week that you said you don't really read emails as much as you read Twitter.
And the thing is, I did read this email. I went, I have to remember that for next time. And of course, I totally forgot. I just, I'm bad at my job.
Thank you, Patrick, for doing the smart thing and taking a screenshot of that email and tweeting it to Nick.
It was tweeted to me?
Or no, I guess maybe it was tweeted to the podcast. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Which is to you.
I didn't see it on Twitter. Patrick, I apologize for not responding to your email, but it's a great question.
So his question is that you've talked about NAS systems a lot, network attached storage systems, and he's worried that as a 4K filmer, he's recording a lot of data, and he's worried that a NAS won't record or won't be able to hold everything, because he counts up all his external drives, and he comes to up to about 40 terabytes of storage that he's using right now, and he knows he's going to need more.
He's going to grow.
So he's wondering if he should use a NAS to store the stuff he currently has, and how could he accommodate future footage? Should he get lots of NASs?
I think a NAS is great, because who wants to deal with a bajillion external hard drives, right? That's a nightmare. Am I crazy? That's kind of what you do right now, isn't it?
Yeah, I just have a ton of 2 terabyte hard drives. I have probably 10 of them.
Terrible.
And for me, they're like all dated. Like this is the first quarter of 2014 drive, and now I'm on my third 2017 drive.
Okay, so again, the 2 main reasons you'd want a NAS. 1, if you need multiple computers to access the data at the same time. A NAS is great for that because it's on the network and everybody can access it. Or 2, if you want to consolidate all that down. And 40 terabytes is nothing for a NAS. I mean, you're getting into a pricey NAS at that point. But, I mean, an 8-bay NAS with 8 terabyte drives would be, Griffin, how many?
8 times 8? That'd be 64 terabytes?
Yeah, but we're really going to do 6 times 8, right?
That'd be 48.
48?
Yeah.
48 terabytes because, so you buy an 8x8 drive NAS, you put 8 terabyte drives in every bay. 2 of those drives are going to be for parity, so if a hard drive fails, you don't lose any data. In fact, you could lose up to 2 drives and still have all your data.
What's this called? Is this called RAID 10 or is this RAID 5?
That would be RAID 6.
Oh.
So for a NAS of that size with that big of drives, I'm going to recommend 2 parity drives, which is a RAID 6, which is why you'd only get 6 out of the 8 drives worth of storage space.
Sure.
So if one drive fails, it has to go through a rebuild process, and we don't want if another drive failed during that rebuild process on a RAID 5, you lose everything. So this gives you 2 failures before you lose data.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And so, I mean, Synology sells a ton of them. I mean, now we're starting to get into the size of things that I sell, in my day job, 40, 50, 100, 200 terabyte things up into petabytes. And yeah, they're great for that. You can get them huge. You can get an 8 drive NAS and then get an expansion bay that plugs into it, but it still all appears as one giant big block of storage that all your systems can access. So that's what
I mean, if he has 40 terabytes now, do you recommend he just goes out and spends a bunch of money and has like a 500 terabyte NAS or something?
Well, 500 terabytes is half a petabyte. That would certainly, I mean, now we're probably talking real big money. But you could go out and get a 60 terabyte NAS for thousands of dollars and not tens of thousands probably. I mean, let's see.
And then when
would
you
I
do
pay 160 for those drives? 8 times 160 is 0. That's not right. I don't think 8 times 160 is 0. I did something wrong there. So we're talking to get 48 terabytes of usable space and have those extra drives for redundancy. At the price I paid, $1,280 just for hard drives, and then the NAS itself is going to be another $1,000 or so, or maybe $2,000 in that price range. So
yeah, storage is expensive.
Not horrible. Storage is expensive, yeah, but you're getting redundancy, you're getting
and let's say,
right? Everything's all together.
Let's say he gets 48 terabytes, and then he starts to get close to the edge. Do you buy another 48 terabyte NAS, or is there an easy way to upgrade a NAS?
Yeah, it depends on the NAS, but the Synology ones allow you to grow, so you can get so maybe you buy a 10 bay and you only put 8 drives in it. You can just add another drive and it'll grow by that much. Okay. Or if you filled up all the bays, they have expansion shelves that plug in, and then they can grow that storage space too.
But you wouldn't like swap a drive.
I mean, that actually is an option. Say you have a NAS you built 2 years ago and it is full of 4 terabyte drives, and you're like, man, I really wish I had 8 terabyte drives. You can start swapping them out with Synology with 8 terabyte drives. It'll rebuild. Okay. And then once they're all replaced with 8 terabyte drives, you'll have all that space available. Yeah. So you can do that too.
I still like my system, although I do spend, I guess, something like $150 each time I buy one of these drives. So I mean, I've probably definitely spent more than $1,000 on hard drives.
Oh yeah, it's easy. And then I also recommend, not keeping all your footage forever if you don't really need it, or dumping it up to the cloud or something like that where maybe it's a little cheaper.
Right. Yeah, I mean, especially our podcast videos, I am throwing away that footage every time I finish a video.
What? You're not saving it? You're not just reviewing them at night because you're bored?
Nope. I mean, I don't need the raw footage. In fact, I'm not even saving like a good high quality version of the podcast. I'm really just making the...
You're breaking my heart.
It just doesn't matter.
But Sriracha, you'll keep around forever.
Well, yeah, Sriracha. I have all the project files for that. So I guess every project has a varying level of like, how likely do you need to go back to this? Or...
What if we find an error in podcast episode 5 and you need to go re-edit it?
I think the way the podcast is, we would just make a new episode that corrects it.
For shame.
We'll cover it. I mean, this is episode 36 now. Let's make episode 37 where we say, hey, we were wrong about everything.
Griffin, we've got one more question, and we're going off the rails. So I'm going to bring it back home. YouTube comment from GW Studios. Hi, guys. I'm wondering how to shoot for a run-and-gun documentary at night with no lights. I'm filming with a flood rescue team next week as they train, so we will be on boats, and I won't be able to set up lights. Other than using a fast lens, what else can I do? That sounds really fun and cool, and I want to see that.
Yeah. In fact, it's helpful that I just watched a short doc about someone's experience in Florida helping people evacuate. And they were on boats. It was at night. It was the same situation. And I do remember watching the film and thinking, wow, it is really dark. I mean, you're just like, the power's out. They're in a parking lot that's flooded. There is no light. And they did have light. I'm not even sure what their source was. It might have been that they had an on-camera light. It could have even just been they had an iPhone light going. I think in this kind of situation, you're going to need something. I don't think you'll just be able to go in with a fast lens, because remember, even a fast lens needs something. It can't shoot in pitch black darkness. And all video looks better with some light. So even if it's just a flashlight that you bring, you just need to think about what. But I guess I imagine the rescue team themselves will need light just to do their work. So maybe it'll be okay.
But it seems like this is one of those times when an on-camera light is probably the way to go.
Yeah, I mean, they'll be pointing their lights at buildings, at people they're trying to rescue. You may just need an additional light to get their faces when you're talking to them or something. But
you don't necessarily need you share that footage.
You don't need like expensive lighting. Just anything will go well with your fast lens.
Yep.
Well, cool. That's it for this week.
Boom, done. Mr. Hammond, it was a pleasure, as always, speaking with you today.
And we'll be back next week for episode 37 of the Hey Indie Filmmakers podcast on Wednesdays, like usual.
That will be tremendous.
I'll talk to you soon.
Why are you laughing at me? It's not cool.
I don't know.
We'll talk to you later. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
All right. Check 1, 2. Check. I'm good.
Okay. You ready? Oh, wait. Okay. Now I'm ready. Okay. I will begin.